And Frank, you're very welcome. Thank you very much indeed. So plenty of opportunity for everyone here to ask questions and also to contribute through our voting system as well over the next, half an hour or so. I get the power seat, do I? Oh, there we go. I've been promoted to business class. Great. Now, Paddy, maybe I can start with you, because I mentioned that statistic from the IEA, 12% target by 2035. I was reading your blurb on the Gulf Intelligence app today, and you were saying you hope 10% of the power that you generate at ACWA Power will be renewable. That's your target. But is this just wishful thinking, or are these realistic, attainable targets?
Probably the quickest way I can answer that, I believe they are, and we are already down the road of starting to achieve it. The quickest answer I can give you is this. We're a 9-year-old company. The first 9 years, we have built up a portfolio of $23.5 billion US worth of power generation and desalinated water production assets. In that $23.5 billion, we have $1.6 billion only in renewables that has been committed, that's under construction. Right now, we are working on transactions that are either in financing or in bid stage or just starting, in bid stage, worth $15 billion. $7.4 billion of that is in renewables. There's your answer.
That's a big number, so half.
And we work in the MENA region predominantly, and a little bit in the southern cone of Africa. So there you go. That's what the market is responding. We are not biasing our investment decisions. We are responding to market. We are here to serve the world. So
you say you're technology and fuel agnostic?
Correct.
You also make great play of the cost of generating power, and you talk about your plant in Morocco, in Saudi Arabia, and the cost per kilowatt hour. Just remind us how these are stacking up in ballpark terms now against conventional gas-powered or diesel-powered.
Okay, the first problem in trying to put these numbers together is at what price do you input your conventional fuel? The other way to present it is this. The first utility scale PV plant was tendered early last year in Saudi Arabia, a 100 megawatt photovoltaic plant for the city of Mecca. The tariff that we offered was 12 US cents per kilowatt hour. To produce that power for that period of time at 12 cents using, let us say, oil, which is not the cleverest way to do it, but if you want to use oil-fired power plant, the government will need to provide oil at $42 a barrel for the next 25 years, every day. The 3,500 barrels of oil that we will need per day. Or to use gas, government will need to provide gas at 8.2 cents per million BTU. So, as you can see, we are now starting to get competitive all of you believed that oil price was going to be up there at above $100 for the foreseeable future. So a significant amount, I'm not saying the entire power generation should be switched across to renewables, but that segment that we use during the middle of the day, when we don't need to store the energy, we don't need to worry about it, we just consume it, we should be switching it very quickly, as quickly as possible, to solar. And we don't need to shut down plants because our demand is growing. So all we need to do is just now add new capacity and move the existing capacity more for base.
Frank Wouters, if I can bring you in from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Association. You've been working in renewables for 2.5 decades now. You were at Masdar here in Abu Dhabi before you joined IRENA, and you spent a lot of your career in Europe and around the world. When do you think renewables reached the tipping point and suddenly became not just a kind of a nice to have or a vanity project subsidized by government, but a real sustainable business case in broad terms?
Well, I think if you're looking at some of the examples that Paddy mentioned, I think we've actually reached that tipping point. We've seen in the last couple of years, we've seen auctions which were agnostic in Brazil, where wind was cheaper than gas. We've seen auctions in Australia where wind was cheaper than coal. We've seen similar exercises in Uruguay where solar went for 9 cents per kilowatt hours and wind went for 6 cents per kilowatt hours. So I think we're already seeing that, and this is utility scale. I think where you see the real change in the way we think and the way we work with energy is actually in distributed generation. And this is where, if you're looking at Germany more closely, there's 35 gigawatts or 35,000 megawatts of solar, which is actually to almost 50% owned by private people. And these are people that take out the mortgage, they increase the mortgage on the house, go to the local bank who finances it, an installer comes and puts these things up, and they basically reduce their energy bill on a monthly basis. And I think this is the real revolution that we're seeing.
And how long till I can do that on top of my villa in Jumeirah in Dubai?
Well, I think the issue, and this has been addressed by a number of people before, is we need to have the right pricing situation. And if you're in an environment where the alternatives to solar are heavily subsidized, which they are, then you don't have a level playing field. So that will take some action to actually really have the price for the energy that it deserves, and then solar could be competitive. But right now, that's a difficult equation.
Let's talk about a different aspect to this. Richard, if I can bring you in. Renewables are great and they have a bright future, but they're only part of the equation. And I know you guys at Maersk have done, or are doing a lot of cool stuff in terms of clean energy with your Trigen system. And I was watching the videos on YouTube. There's some great videos on YouTube that have been uploaded by Maersk that show how this stuff works. And it seems almost like alchemy, because you get enhanced oil recovery, gas to pump into oil fields, you get electricity, and you get clean water, all from nasty CO2.
And where we're coming from, we're an oil company, so where we're coming from is seeing where the value proposition is for what we call clean energy to an oil company, and where clean energy involving hydrocarbons can actually come into the whole energy mix. And it's been mentioned a few times this morning about the energy mix and diversification of the energy mix, and that's what we're interested in. In terms of the Trigen technology that you mentioned, I mean, as James pointed out, we've been known as an oil company to differentiate ourselves for many years on the deployment of long horizontal well technology for developing these tight carbonate reservoirs. Trigen is actually something that we've brought into the company and are developing as a capability within the company, and it's not all just about the technology, but the technology is a key part of that to be our next kind of game changer, and to enable us to together with partners, access what we call technically and challenging hydrocarbon resources. And one suite of those challenging hydrocarbon resources can be oil that should be developable through enhanced oil recovery, particularly CO2 enhanced oil recovery, but where the cost of the CO2 sources or the access to viable long-term CO2 sources simply just may not be viable for a compelling business proposition. So what Trigen is it's something that's being developed from the space industry, and it's basically a rocket engine turned on its side. It's combined with turbine technology, and our partners in this are Siemens. And what it does is it burns hydrocarbon gas, which can also be contaminated hydrocarbon gas at extremely high temperatures together with pure oxygen to produce fully captured CO2, so no emissions, and power, so it's clean power, and then pure water. And a typical Trigen unit will produce 180 to 200 megawatts of power, so it's a fairly sizable power station. Around 45 million standard cubic feet of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, which a kind of ballpark figure, what we're looking at here, say, is around an incremental production of around 7,000 barrels of oil per day per unit. And then around 500,000 gallons of pure water per day without desalination. So we actually see that as quite an interesting prospect here in the UAE and for Abu Dhabi, and we're particularly encouraged by the announcement during the ADIPEC week of the collaboration between Masdar and ADNOC towards commercial scale carbon capture, utilization and storage projects, and utilization being the key word there.
And it does, I mean, it sounds great. Yeah, I'll have 3. Maybe Adil can lend me the money to buy them if it delivers all those benefits.
Exactly.
But when I was doing some research on it, this is not a new technology. It's been around since 2011. What's stopping the world from jumping on this and saying, well, great, we've cracked it?
It's actually been around a bit longer than that, and the core technology was developed by a small California company called Clean Energy Systems. What we believe is going to unlock this is to actually have a company like an oil company that will invest in it, but will also recognize how this can be taken forward, not just as a technology, but as a capability, and to provide, you know, a compelling business case for why this is something that is interesting, both from the whole sphere of enhanced oil recovery, developing stranded gas reserves, but also what it can actually mean in terms of the whole national agenda. And the national agenda comes back to the things like developing clean power and you know, having this kind of green footprint. And it's not a slam dunk. I mean, we've been working on this on a global scale now for 2 or 3 years. The business development effort is challenging. We're working in a number of continents in very, very different types of projects.
So what is the challenge?
It's just not off the ground yet. The challenge, I think, is in comparison with conventional upstream, is aligning all the components of the value chain and all the stakeholders that are required to make that value chain work. So each individual has to recognize that, sure, it means good business sense from a commercial perspective for his business, but also that the whole thing, the whole cake, has to be maximized, and that it requires a certain amount of kind of higher level different thinking. And I think that in many respects, the kind of NOC environment is often a good place to start, where you can start to take the helicopter view at sort of government level and look at what this can mean for the country, as well as, you know, for a particular problem on a particular oil field.
Adil, if I can turn to you, I know
Sure.
the IFC, you have been financing projects here in the renewables sphere and looking more broadly at the issue of a diversified energy base. Do you have a kind of hierarchy of projects that you think are the most viable? I mean, you've got an engineering background yourself,
Right.
haven't you? I mean,
Right.
you're a financier now, but you understand the science as well behind this. And when you look at these various projects that come across your table, do you have a hierarchy when you think, you know what, wind is just fantastic, or solar is, to borrow your phrase, Richard, a slam dunk?
Look, when you're making any investment in any industry, you want to be with the lower cost producer, right? That's the ultimate salvation anything goes wrong in a market. So when I look at a power plant, I have to see what are the other sources of generation around this, right? And if you asked me 3 years ago, 4 years ago, renewable wouldn't feature into that, right? It was always more expensive, right? Solar PV was, and Paddy knows this better than me, but closer to 30 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Now things are different. So now when somebody brings me a solar PV plant, right, and Paddy's mentioning 12 cents, I'm looking at 15 in Jordan. What is the alternative? The alternative is burning diesel or importing a fuel oil, and you're looking at 20 cents, right? So suddenly I'm going to be financing a plant which is going to be cheaper than the next alternative. In the case of Jordan, 100% of that energy today in the power sector is at 18 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So please bring me a wind plant at 12 and bring me a solar PV plant at 15.
What are the resource constraints in terms of the land needed for solar or wind? Are there meaningful resource constraints, land constraints?
No, there are no significant land constraints. I mean, land tenure in this part of the world is much more complicated, but that also is possibly helpful. because then central government is able to procure or able to allocate and secure the sufficient land space. Absolutely correct. Vast land space is required, but in the right places. But no, this is not a constraint at all. The only constraint really is just the time for it to kick off. The important point to understand is this all became possible only, to be honest, 3 plus or minus years ago. Now, 3 years is a very short time frame to change battle tankers. Governments have pursued a particular path, subsidized the input cost of fuel for generation and subsidized the tariffs. Now, absolutely every government in this region recognizes that the most logical thing to do is to move 20 to 30% and possibly up to 40% of their generation across into renewables as fast as possible. But to then implement that, so many ducks need to be lined up. It just takes time. So
if we take that figure from the IEA of 12% by 2035, that could actually be, rather than just wishful thinking, it could be woefully conservative.
I fully expect it to be much more than that.
Frank,
at the rate at which we are launching.
Yeah, I think, Paddy's point is absolutely true. It's our daily challenge is to convey the dynamism in this sector. And if I look at my own history, when I was a teenager, solar cells were 100 times more expensive than they are right now. And yes, what we've seen in the last couple of years, it's an extreme drop in prices. And our daily work is actually updating longer term or mid-term government plans and making them aware of the present situation and making them aware of the increasing competitiveness. So this is a challenge that we're facing.
Yeah, there are two things that are happening at the same time. Prices have come down because cost of manufacturing, cost of the content has come down. Manufacturing has become much more efficient and all the rest of it. At the same time, efficiency is going fast. I mean, in the case of conversion, in the case of photovoltaic, the fact that even today only we are converting something like 16% of the energy that is being received. Technical limits are much, much higher. So we've got a long way to go before, so lots more opportunity is there for efficiency improvements. So the 12 cents that I told you, anybody's guess what it will be in 10 years' time. 6, probably.
I think one element that we also should consider, and that's an extremely powerful aspect of specifically photovoltaic solar cells. If you're looking at what happened in Germany in December 2011, mostly private people installed 3 gigawatts on their roofs. And I lived in Germany for 13 years. It's not the best month to go up on a roof and install a solar panel, but 3,000 megawatts in 4 weeks. This was all completely privately financed individuals who went to the bank, got a mortgage, and had these things up the roof. So it's extremely fast. So in terms of technical potential of actually getting this stuff done and into the grid, that's not the issue.
But solar power is on Frank's roof or my roof. Is that ever going to be a space that a company like ACWA could play in? My logic says probably not, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, as the delivery models change, why shouldn't we be in a position to then roll out a financing mechanism that provided the underlying pricing structure is sorted out here, where there is a mechanism where, say, the central distributor recognizes the differential value, we should be able to come up with a pricing, a funding model that allows distributed generation to be installed in people, for us to rent people's roofs, give them power for nothing, and export whenever they're not using. There are a zillion different models that are already being thought of. So this is not going to be the constraint either. And yes, I can see ourselves playing in that.
It sounds almost too good to be true. I'm convinced, I'm sold, but maybe I'm asking the wrong questions in my mind. Has anyone got any perspectives on this? I think we've got some microphones, because I would like to hear maybe some people just to challenge some of these assumptions. Yes, please, the gentleman just to my right on the second table back. If you could introduce yourself and perhaps make a comment. Here we go, here's a microphone for you.
So good afternoon, from Shell. My name is Adil Dada. The question I have really has to do with why has it been difficult to take off the government subsidy on oil generated power? I think that cuts across not just the Middle East, but you find out in most countries where you have oil production, basically, because that could be the underlying issue. And how can you do that safely without disrupting the economy? Thank you.
Well, we don't have a government minister on the panel. Frank, as a NGO, for want of a better word, do you want to have a stab at that? Why aren't these subsidies being removed?
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's a problem for many governments, and they realize that, you know, something needs to be done. But what, of course, hasn't helped is the entire unrest, specifically in this region, which makes it difficult to actually implement unpopular measures. So this is something that we know for a fact. We engage with our member states and their governments, and they struggle with the expenses, because it's just very expensive. And it's also very well known that energy subsidies, specifically for transport fuels, are not targeting you know, the right people. You know, you're basically sponsoring people who have cars who probably do not need that subsidy in the first place. But then you're looking at lobbies, you're looking at vested interest, you're looking at mechanisms that fall into place that make it very unpopular for any government to do something about it. So they're struggling with it, but it's also very difficult to implement. And if you're looking at, for example, what happened in Jordan, in Nigeria and Sudan, every government that has really tried to tackle this has struggled with implementation. So it's not that there is not an awareness that people do not want to reduce these subsidies, but it's just difficult to implement, and as a politician, very difficult to implement.
Is there a chance, Paddy, that solar, for example, to take your example, could be so efficient that actually it gets down to the subsidy price in layman's terms?
Well, so just to give you an idea of the subsidized price, then the subsidized price is 3 cents per kilowatt hour. We are producing, as a private producer, we produce 15% of Saudi Arabia's electricity. We sell bulk to the grid at 3 cents per kilowatt hour, because I'm given oil at $4 a barrel, and I'm given gas at 75 cents per million BTU. So at that, it'll take quite a while for us to get to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. But the other, you know, okay, again, I'm not a politician, I'm not involved in policy making, but I am pretty embedded in the Saudi electricity sector, obviously, particularly in a very significant way over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, and I've watched this movie unfold. The challenge, the reason why subsidies, everybody understands the amounts of subsidies. Ministry of Finance is very clever. They know exactly what they're losing. But the problem is there are too many different agencies involved. There are way too many agencies that are all with conflicting interests. And there has been a level of misunderstanding also about this question. If we allow, well, to start with, renewables was not a subject for discussion until 3 years ago anyway. So, and the minute you started to discuss it, then it took a while for people to respect and understand that, yes, it is true that we can generate cost efficiently a certain segment of the power demand that we use. But then how is that going to, but it's still going to be 12 cents, not the 3 cents that they see as an IPP selling into the grid. Then the sort of big confusion around, okay, how's that going to then affect my retail tariff? Well, no, you don't need to. You don't need to worry about your retail tariff. You want to continue to subsidize it, subsidize it. What you as a government should be obviously concerned about is how much money, and keep reducing that amount of money that you are putting into that subsidy. So to the extent, if you generate electricity using oil, the true price at about $100 per barrel is 27 cents per kilowatt hour. So, no, don't worry. You want to sell at 1 cent? That's fine. But at least keep reducing that 26 cents. If you buy at 12 cents renewable, you only have to subsidize 11. It's a no-brainer. Now that's starting to be understood. And that is what is now starting to push.
I'll just make one more comment.
Please.
I mean, I think subsidies are leading to increased consumption in domestically, right? And we saw a poll that said people are assuming 35% of oil production will be used domestically, right? And is that the right number? Because if you didn't have subsidies, maybe people would be more efficient, right? So at some point, I think this will start hurting countries' capacity to export oil.
We've got a couple more questions here. Then I'm going to go to the voting machines. And in fact, I noticed, Richard, you brought yours with you.
I didn't.
If the other guys didn't, perhaps Kate or one of my colleagues from Gulf Intelligence could scavenge and get some voting devices for our fellow panelists. It's a conspiracy between the two Richards. But before that, I'll take a question from the gentleman to my left. Yes, please, sir.
Hi, thank you very much. Christopher Sorensen, I work for the corporate leadership at Mastar, and we have a great engagement with everyone on the panel here, so look forward to continuing that. Looking towards the solution space, and you were alluding to this in your last statement, working with governments to find solutions without regard to subsidy, but to displace subsidies. We're looking at, aspirationally, at market structures like PPPs or other structures. How do you on the panel see the next decade of working with market structures as they are to find solutions, helping governments to understand they can displace subsidy-based energy with new energy, which is at an LCOE, which is very attractive right now?
Adil, if I could bring you in first of all on this, as a finance guy.
So I think structuring a PPP and running an effective bid process should lead to the lowest cost, right? And we've seen this, and maybe the project in Medina, the solar project, shows you coming in and bidding at 12 cents a kilowatt hour is one of the, well, actually it's one of the lowest in the world. I think Chile is probably a little bit lower. So running an effective process to bring in the private sector reduces your cost of that service. And we're a great believer in running that process. And that should give you the true cost that the private sector is willing to pay for that, which helps then put things in perspective in terms of subsidies, I think. Paddy?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think generation of electricity is something that the technology is there. There is nothing sophisticated about it. There is capital. The minute you transfer that responsibility to the private sector, you can bring enormous amount of efficiency, as it's being shown throughout the region. It's already well proven with fossil fuel-based electricity generation. Every tender attracts lots of interest. The price differences between the highest and the lowest are very, very significant. So renewables is no different. As you go down the road of renewable energy, why would you want to change that model? And private sector has got lots of capacity, and I don't think we're going to run out of capital. There's a significant amount of appetite. And that, to me, is, okay, so that's what I would say, because I'm from the private sector. But you can see the answer. The proof of the pudding is there from other sectors.
Richard, very briefly, if I could bring you in, because you talked about this, didn't you? What's the structure going to be?
I would just like to say that, because this also relates to the previous discussion around subsidies, is that our general business approach for Trigen, whether it be the proposition that we're discussing here for Abu Dhabi, or what we're doing in North America, in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, is the approach has to be that we neither rely on receiving subsidies, nor do we rely on subsidies being taken away in order to be able to compete as a power generating entity, which also is able to produce all the other components of the value chain at a competitive cost compared with their next best alternative, whether it be the CO2 price, the price we pay for the feed gas, or, as I say, the price that we sell the power for. So, if we can't get that to work, and I mean this relates to the famous spark spread, with the relationship between the gas price and the electricity price, and then how all that fits together into the enabling CO2 and then the subsequent value you get out of the oil. If we can't get that to work, then we don't have a business case. But we're not relying on breaking or changing prevailing market factors, whether there be subsidies in there or not.
Should we go to some of our questions now? Get your views on some of the issues that we think are important. Zamir, can we bring up the first question in what is our final panel of the day, our final set of questions? Here we go. Question one is about Abu Dhabi. A 7% renewables target by 2020, and that it aims to generate 30% of all electricity via low carbon energy sources under its economic vision 2030. So here's a question. Which of the following is the most important initiative to enact to have a realistic chance of hitting these targets? Number one, you can see them, government support for PPP. 2, improving price transparency in the energy sector. In particular, will be essential to incentivise the private sector to invest in the production of clean power. 3, education, public engagement. That's a key pillar to support Abu Dhabi's target. Number 4, government has a critical role to play in creating markets and policies that accelerate the development and deployment of clean energy technologies. And number 5, that word, subsidies in the power sector need to be restructured to bolster greater efficiencies. Which of those is the most important? Vote now. Let's get the countdown going. Great stuff. And the winner is a tie between subsidies and government creating markets. I have to say I was furiously pressing 5 as many times as possible because I feel so strongly about the subject. Yeah. Any reaction to that from Frank, from you in particular?
Yeah, I pressed 4, but I must say that if you're looking at all 5, they're all important. So it's all of the above. But in terms of the present situation, I think the government has the key to unlocking the situation and basically steering it by having a clearer regulatory framework, also tackle the subsidy. But we need to engage with the wider public. It's still new. We need to educate. So it's really all of the above.
Richard, what did you go for?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Frank's saying. I see 5 and 2 as being somewhat closely related.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, as far as what we're looking at for Trigen, which of course is not renewable, we're trying to play within the playing field as it is. But I think for renewables to succeed in gaining a higher share of the power generating capacity, then clearly the subsidies are going to be a major hurdle.
Let's get the next question. A couple more questions to go and then we're going to break for lunch. Thanks, Samir. Dead simple. Carbon capture and storage, and also CO2 injection via enhanced oil recovery. Will they become necessities rather than optional for the hydrocarbon-rich Gulf states by the end of this decade? Yes or no? Let's get the clock going. A nice to have or a necessity by 2020? Yeah. Do you see, that surprises me. I thought we'd have more yeses. Yeah, did anyone on the panel vote no?
I did. No, I'm only kidding.
Did anyone vote no?
No.
No. I mean, I would guess they're probably essential. Did anyone say no? That they're not going to be essential?
I want to talk about it.
Sorry? Exactly. Clearly, 29% did. So, anyone want to share their thoughts on that and their reasons? Yes, please. If you can get a microphone, please. And if you could briefly reintroduce yourself, Robin.
Yes, Robin Mills, MENA Energy Consulting. I voted yes, but I think it's a case-by-case thing. I think it depends which Gulf state you look at. I mean, I think the case in Abu Dhabi is excellent because of the amount of gas reinjection. I think the case in Oman is excellent because of the mature fields. Saudi's looking at it. Maybe Kuwait, maybe Kuwait is not such an issue. I think certainly for Iraq, that's further down the line. So it depends where you look, but I think it's certainly in the right places. It clearly has a huge economic benefit.
But can I just say,
please.
I think I agree with Robin. It depends from country to country, but this is an investment. It's a capital investment you're making to get an energy source out, right? Compare this to reducing subsidies and maybe putting that money towards solar, right? So again, there has to be a cost benefit done of what is that resource going to cost you once you put in the cost of capturing carbon dioxide, transporting it, putting it in the field, versus maybe solar at 10 cents, maybe in 5 years or lower.
Yeah, less.
So
let's get the final question. Zamir, thanks very much indeed. Question 3. China. Okay, always seems to come back to China, doesn't it? The world's biggest carbon emitter. First country in which more than 20 million vehicles were sold in a given year. That could be 24 million vehicles this year. And of course, that has many implications. One of them is smog levels in a number of Chinese cities that surpass World Health Organization safety thresholds, not just pass them, but 40-fold. It's incredible. Can China's economic juggernaut keep motoring along to 2020 with these kind of stats? Okay, can it carry on? Vote now. Let's get the countdown. Three, two, one. Most people think not. Paddy, you said yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Why? Very simple. Because already you see it. They are pouring so much of effort into renewables. They are switching very fast. I mean, one thing that Chinese have taught all of us is the speed with which they move and how fast they can implement. That's one of the benefits possibly of the central economy. But so, I think the underlying question is, will they continue to generate these kind of statistics in 20? No, hopefully not. And I think that is unsustainable. But I think they will not be producing so much of pollution. I think you will start to see dramatic reductions.
Frank?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at the car issue, I mean, everybody who travels to China recently, you know, some of these cities are just really difficult to breathe. I think recently Qingdao capped the number of motor vehicles in the city. So it is, it's an issue, and it's also an issue that's becoming socially unacceptable. There's more and more demonstrations, there's more and more public outcry. So China is changing the way they're using energy, and they are cleaning up their situation. So that's why I think it will continue to grow, but it has to be cleaner. There's no other way.
I'm going to ask both Adil and Richard for their view on the car story, and then I'm going to ask each of you to give your 30-second summary or your 30-second manifesto for cleaner energy by 2020 here in the UAE and hitting some of those targets. But first of all, the issue of China. Can it carry on like this? 40 times World Health Organization safety thresholds, Richard?
Apparently not. And in fact, I was surprised to know just what a significant percentage of the power generating capacity in China is in fact renewable. Yeah. Both in terms of carbon avoidance, hydropower and wind power. And the Chinese also, I think, will be, China will be a major pioneer of developing, you know, solar equipment and technology, and will drive the price down, not just for the domestic markets, but for the international market, but for the domestic market. And I think that hopefully will have a major impact in the long run.
Okay, well, we're running short of time now, so I'm going to ask you each to summarize just 30 seconds or so with your manifesto for renewable and clean energy here in the Middle East and North Africa through to 2020 and perhaps beyond. Adil?
I mean, as I said in my speech, reducing energy subsidies or doing something about them. If you can't reduce subsidies, maybe push those subsidies towards renewable energy, which is cleaner, right? So it's a shifting of the subsidy. I think price signals are important. So when you are asking somebody to put in a rooftop plant or a solar PV grid-connected facility, what is the price of power? Right? So putting in some kind of a structure, maybe it's PPPs that go into place. And you know, don't forget Abu Dhabi is one of the pioneers of PPPs in the energy, in the electricity industry. So there's already a framework to use for that. And I think keep an eye on technology changes. I think things will become much more efficient and thereby cheaper. So that will lead to a natural shift towards people going for renewables, solar in particular for this region.
Richard, your manifesto.
So clean energy does not just mean renewables, and there's a role for hydrocarbons in the clean energy mix. And I would just say for Abu Dhabi, we have a kind of macro business case of installing 7 tri-gen plants over a period up to 2020 and beyond that could actually satisfy 7% of the power requirements as clean energy, and would actually have the equivalent of, in terms of carbon capture, of taking all the cars off the road in Abu Dhabi.
Happy days. Paddy?
Look, I'm much more optimistic about how quickly renewables will get taken up, and also how significantly energy intensity of what we do will start to reduce. The thing I think that we need to now be very careful about and take maximum advantage of is that if we are going to move and invest in such a significant way in this sort of new technology and this emerging growing technology, that we don't repeat possibly the mistakes of the oil sector, in that we need to, from day one, have an intensive program to bring the technology in, localize it, create the knowledge here, and create manufacturing capacity, and create and retain more of the economic value that the installation, the construction will take up. So that's I think is.
Thanks, Paddy, for that excellent segue, because I think building also on the observation with youth unemployment, I think renewables as an engine, as an economic engine, is going to be something to watch. If you're looking at the Shams project, it required 12 million man-hours. There is 5.7 million people employed in the sector. That's continuing to grow. Our research estimate that it will be 15 million jobs by 2030. And this is one of the major features that renewables can actually bring to this region.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I have to say it's left me with probably the greatest sense of optimism I have about renewable energy and clean energy, probably that I've ever experienced. Let's hope that this bright future that you've outlined actually comes to pass. My thanks to our panelists, Adil, Richard, thanks very much indeed. Paddy and Frank, really appreciate your time. You can take your seats now.